Welcome to February's ECR Wednesday webinar, hosted by Elife, the series that aims to give early career researchers a platform to discuss issues important to you in your research career. Today our speakers will discuss the importance of queer visibility in STEM diversity. The webinar will begin with the panelists sharing their stories. Then, in the second half of the webinar, we'll be putting your questions to them. To ask a question, you can type in the question box on the GoToWebinar Functions panel, or you can tweet us. We are at Elife Community using the ECR Wednesday hashtag. Finally, I'd just like to let you know that we are recording the webinar and will make it available on YouTube in the near future. Now I'll pass over to Vinod to introduce the panelists.
Thank you, Emma. Hello, everyone. I have a great pleasure in welcoming everyone to Early Career Researchers Wednesday webinar on queer visibility in science, technology, engineering, and medicine diversity. Just to get started, a quick word about our host, Elife. Elife is a nonprofit organization which is a mission-driven nonprofit organization focused on improving scientific communication and technologies surrounding scientific communication. So at Elife, we recognize the most responsible behaviors in science and promote them, and thereby increase the research impact. And we also had supporting, Elife is very interested in supporting early career researchers because everyone is, in Elife is aware of the pressures that early career researchers face. And hence we have had early career advisory group for around 5 years. And the one that you see around is the recent group that we have, who are all early career advisors who lead different initiatives. And one such initiative is also this particular webinar series, which is aimed at increasing early career researchers' navigation through the academic system. And this particular series, in this particular webinar, we'll be talking about diversity. And when we talk about diversity, there are several aspects of diversity which also has intersectionality. For example, you could assume by looking at me, that I have a male-identified body form or a voice that sounds like a male person. And you could also recognize that I'm a person of color. And these are all identities that are visible. There are several other invisible identities that doesn't get talked over. And that is something that we will talk today, which is the queer identity, or LGBT in short, which is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, asexual, and the other allies, and queer umbrella in general. This particular webinar is dedicated in memory of Professor Ben Barres, who has been a pioneer in glial research, or he's a neuroscientist who has made tremendous discoveries in glia cells. And he has also been a very supportive advocate of gender equality in scientific research. And with the tribute to Ben Barres, I welcome all the panelists today. Joining us today are Alexis Johnson from Germany, who's running Pineapple Laboratories, and Giles Allred, who's joining us from Cambridge, and Lauren Esposito, joining us from California Academy of Sciences. I welcome you all to this particular webinar. And before we go into the stories of the panelists, I'd like to mention that you can follow the discussions using ECR Wednesday hashtag on Twitter, and send us questions via the GoToWebinar question box, or tweet us using ECR Wednesday hashtag to Elife Community account. With that, I'd now invite Alexis Johnson to present her experiences and initiatives that she's leading. Alexis, please.
Hi everyone. Yeah, this is the first kind of my first time doing this kind of format sharing, so I'm kind of like, I don't know how to really interact with it, but yeah. So I just wanted to share maybe some thoughts about about what does it mean to be queer or trans in science. and a little bit what is it for me. So my name is Alexis. I have 2 hands and I have 2 eyes and 2 legs. That's kind of like that body part of me. You know, there is actually a walking person with a brain. In the brain, I studied actually material science, and then I was doing research in bioengineering, in biomaterials, and my story is that I didn't feel that the social infrastructure and the conditions when I was doing my research and studying, they were not accommodating they were not very welcoming, and there was no framework that actually I could develop myself in a healthy way, you know, in a way that it was the way that my heart, that my soul wanted. So I've been talking about, yeah, like body, mind, and soul. So according to some cultures, some people are 2 spirits, or in the Western understanding, they call some of these people 2 spirit or 3rd gender or transgender. And that's pretty much like a round way how I would like to identify myself. Because we are multidimensional people. We are not just only one dimension. And Binod was talking about a little bit about identities, but this is the way how I see it, you know, like the body, the intellectual part of me, and also the spiritual part of me that that has an important also play. So I wanted to speak also this diversity. That diversity happens in nature, like in the plant kingdom, and in the animal kingdom, and the mineral kingdom. We have lots of diversity, and it's very funny because in the mineral kingdom we have cisgender molecules and trans molecules. So we have like carbon molecules that are cis isomeric geometric in space, and also trans geometric molecules. So there is diversity also in the configuration of molecules in the mineral kingdom, in how the matter, in how molecules and chemistry is structured. And there is also a wide variety of gender diversity in plants. Giles, you probably know about this better than me. Like tulips are such a common flower, but this flower is actually a hermaphrodite flower, and there are plants who are having male flowers and female flowers. There's a whole variety of that in plants. And in for example, and I had also a very beautiful example for microorganisms. And my example is there is this worm. It's called I'm gonna look for it now. There is this worm in the animal kingdom, C. elegans. The C. elegans, roundworms, C. elegans nematodes. There are so many experiments that are being done using C. elegans as a model, because they share also certain genetic similarities with humans in certain genetic information, and it's a model. So what I wanted to say is that there is a diversity in the mineral kingdom and in the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. But why is it so difficult for us humans to accept diversity in humans? And this is a very maybe stupid question, because we have always, as researchers, putting like a fence, like a line. I am the observer, and I'm doing research, and that something is an object that I study. But the interesting question here is, why do I have that perception that actually that humans do not belong to that nature, to that diverse ecosystem? So we humans don't see each other as part of the animal kingdom, the mineral kingdom, and the plant kingdom, and or we have sometimes a little bit difficulties to grasp that difference in that we're part of this ecosystem. I do understand that we have a different level of consciousness and rational understanding, and it's totally fine. But my question is, why is it for us humans difficult to understand that there is also a diversity of humans, that phenotypically we can look different, and that genetically we can also be different? So, and I'm not just talking now about the cultural variable, and I'm trying maybe to explain this in a quasi my own way, how I experience it. And this sort of like a separation between this separation that we perceive in these genotypical or phenotypical differences is due to the ego and or perceptions. So when you're working as a scientist and it happens that you are also trans, like in my case, like I thought, okay, I'm working with super smart people. Why should I sort of like hassle here? Like everyone is so smart, but that still doesn't eliminate the variable that there is misunderstanding when you're working with people. So I saw this connection between also the subjective part, and that's how I came with Pineapple Laboratories, which is my my little baby, where I like to, let's say, bridge these two fields of technology, but also having the arts and the humanities to discuss certain issues that we have not been addressing in science. Yes, so I also wanted to talk also, why is it also so difficult to be visible as a trans person? And because there has been a whole history of course transphobia, but also due to the colonial culture of science and also the pathologization, you know, that these other like separating, like I am the observer, I am the researcher, okay, these people are the ones who are experiencing certain pathology. But now we know, since last year 2018, that it's not a pathology, it's not a mental illness to be transgender. So, but we have been doing so much research in neurobiology and many areas of, you know, also social science about what it means to be trans. So there has been a lot of research about this, but do we actually be able to connect and to bridge that brain and our understanding of the humans and feel them with the heart? And this is maybe something I want to address, because we tend, because in my experience as a scientist, it was like, okay, we scientists have a objective view of the world. We as scientists have a reductionist way how to measure and quantify things. And I don't want to have, let's say, you know, it's better just to be separated. So when you're working with people and it happens that you're trans, there are also many challenges. But also another question that I experienced, it was like, why some trans people are not visible, you know? So it's like, that is a very complex topic that I don't know if in this session, maybe there will be a second session of diversity. But why people are invisible in the academia, and why it's so hard also in your career to be visible, and so many bureaucratic questions that have to do exactly with that question I started at the beginning, like why for us human is so difficult to cope with that diversity, but we do do accept that in the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, and the animal kingdom, as long as that's separated from us. So actually, I wanted also maybe to close up with, so I was speaking also about the content and the teaching of these diversities, that there is a lack of information, also a lot of information, even if we are like, you know, high super qualified scientists, there is a lack of information about diversity issues in humans. We don't like to speak about them. And I also want to talk about two words, action and intention. So we as a scientist, like technology is, technology and science in general is a wonderful tool that can be used for the progress of humanity. And it is also very important what intention we do practice or research, because there have been in history, as I say, many exclusionary science has been used and technologies has been used also in a very exclusionary way. So it hasn't had a very positive intention. So I want to say that science is a beautiful thing, and it's such a beautiful, you know, so much beautiful things to explore. But how are we actually, what we need to be conscious about, what kind of intentions do we have when we're doing research that are not stigmatizing and putting away certain communities in our practice. And I think these conversations that we're having are kind of like transforming these narratives, and it's giving a space to start conversations about how we can not only deconstruct, but how we can transform this practice with a good intention, and that we can see ourselves as a part of this big ecosystem of mineral kingdom, plant kingdom, and animal kingdom, and where humans are actually in balance and are appreciating each other in their nature. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you for touching upon the human ego and then bringing the action and intention in play. From this, now we are moving on to how to actually create inclusive environments. And I would invite Giles to present his views on how we can create inclusive environments. Giles, please.
Great, thanks, Vinod. It's a real pleasure to be here on this panel and a fascinating discussion on queer identity in science. So I'm a faculty member at Cambridge University, and I run a research group in plant genetics, and I'm also an openly gay man. And for me, the scientific process is a very creative process. We have to interpret data. We have to sometimes have leaps of faith in our understanding and directing research that goes into discoveries that nobody else has ever made, and also sometimes throwing out dogmas that may have been present in the field for decades. And I find in order to work at that cutting edge of science, I really have to be very creative. It is a very creative process. And for me to be creative, I have to be vulnerable. I have to be able to expose my vulnerability, and I have to be authentic to myself. If I'm not authentic to myself, I can't be creative. If I shut down parts of myself, I know that that creativity and the capability to be vulnerable is also shut down. So I found that it's in most working environments, it's easy to be authentic to that part of me that is a scientist, but I found it generally much harder to be authentic to the part of me that's a gay man. So I came out in San Francisco about 25 years ago, and I think that was probably the time I felt most authentic to myself. That point of coming out, telling people, telling myself, and telling the people that I loved that I was attracted to men, and that I was a member of the gay community. That was a very liberating thing to do. And in San Francisco, I've been in members of many discussion groups and gay men's retreats where we talked about what it is to be a minority, what it is to be a gay man, what it is to be part of the queer community. And all of that exploration I felt has really made me quite a liberated individual, liberated in how I think about what it means to be gay, what sexuality means, what gender identity means. And certainly when I was younger, I found it relatively easy to be both a scientist and a gay man. But as I moved up in my career structure, and my career is very important to me, I care a lot about my career, but as I moved up into my career structure, I found myself becoming more and more lonely as a gay person. The institute I worked at before I was at Cambridge University, I was a member of faculty, 60 faculty members. I was the only out gay person. And as far as I knew, I was the only out gay faculty member of the 110-year history of that institution. So, the institution had not really addressed gay identity at all. I don't think they thought it was necessary to do so or even to consider it. And there were very, very few gay people very few out gay people at all at the institution, and certainly on the faculty, there were no gay people except for myself. Now, I was an openly gay man. I came from San Francisco. I said, okay, I'm going to be out. It's definitely important to me that I have to be out. But what I actually found, even though I was out as a gay man, I found myself really conforming to what is a heteronormative existence. So I think as a gay man, I'm quite different to your average heterosexual person. I don't have children. So my weekends, I might go out to the gay club and be out all night on a Saturday night dancing. And, that's a very different existence to your average heterosexual faculty member who's at home looking after the kids. And there's more to that. There's more to it than that. I think we have in the gay community, we think much more about gender and sexual identity and have a much more liberated view of what that means. But actually, taking that back into the workplace is very, very difficult. It's not something that generally comes up in conversation. It's not. And I found that often I wasn't even talking about what I was doing at the weekend because it was taking me into a discussion about being gay and having to expose my gay identity. And I found myself many, many times at conferences as I'm introducing myself to other people and the talk moves into personal issues that I actually hide my gay identity by hiding the identity of my husband. So rather than calling my husband or my boyfriend, I refer to him as my partner and often avoid any gender identity to the discussions on who my partner was. So I think I've certainly found that I've conformed, even though I think I consider myself quite a liberated gay man. I think I've generally had to conform to a more heteronormative existence. And I don't know that people were demanding that I do that. It's just that I felt that it was necessary and I felt uncomfortable to always be expressing my gay identity in the workplace. And actually, I think that that's a dangerous thing to do. I've been in situations, I've certainly found myself in my life feeling like I had a very bipolar existence, whereby I was living a pretty openly gay male existence in my private life, but then moving into a very heteronormative existence in my work life. And that is a really unhealthy situation to be. It certainly doesn't support me as a scientist. It doesn't support me in my creativity. And in the long term, it definitely affected my mental health. So I don't think that that's a sustainable way to be. You have to be authentic to yourself. You have to be out and open about yourself in all works of life. And I found that in the diversity agenda that's really moving so strongly in the science community, at the moment it's rather lazy. It's thinking primarily about women in science and the poor representation of women in science. Now, I fully support gender equality in science. I really want to see complete equality of gender across all spectrums of the scientific career structure. But women do not experience themselves as a minority. They only may experience themselves as a minority in the workplace. Your average LGBT person experiences themselves as a minority throughout their existence, both in the workplace and outside the workplace. And it actually takes a lot of guts to go into your workplace and be very open and out as a gay man or as an LGBT person, not just openly out as a gay person, but actually genuine to yourself, being yourself, who you are, whether you're trans or whether you're gay, whether you're a lesbian, queer, intersex, whatever it is that you feel you are, being completely open about that is very challenging. It's very challenging for most individuals to do that. And I think if the scientific organizations are going to take the diversity agenda very seriously, then they have to embrace all of diversity, and that requires being very proactive and welcoming of diversity. It's not enough to say we're not homophobic, we're a liberal faculty and we're not homophobic and that's enough. It's not enough. I think the organizations have to be proactively welcoming of diversity, open about the discussions about diversity, so that everybody within that organization feels welcome and open to be themselves. And I think if we get to that place, then in science we can support diversity, but I think we can also support a very creative environment where science excels. And I think that that's very important for all organizations, that we actually create environments where diversity is welcomed and actually creativity is fully encouraged.
Thank you, Jailas, for that roundup on how institutions can support diversity. So from that, we would now move on to why visibility is really important and how allies can help promote minorities. For that, I'd like to invite Lauren Esposito to present her views and the initiative that she was leading, which is 500 Queer Scientists. Lauren, please.
Thank you. I think I'll echo a lot of the things that Giles just touched upon in his experience, and first just say that I am a scientist. I study scorpion biology at the California Academy of Sciences, which is in San Francisco, which as a city is a very accepting place. It has a really high population of LGBT people, and yet at my institution, and in fact, to my knowledge in the history of my institution, I'm the only queer faculty member. So that really resonated with me. It's something that I've always kind of held on the back burner. I've always been openly gay, but again, it's something that I never really wanted to bring up in professional situations and professional circumstances, in part because it's awkward when you're the only queer person standing in a group of colleagues and you're the one discussing your personal life in detail, whereas everybody else just mentioned what they did on the weekend. So it's this perpetual coming out over and over again that I think is really psychologically taxing for LGBTQ people. And so I can't say that I've ever felt particularly unaccepted in professional circumstances, but I think that many other people that are minorities in science have experienced this. It's this idea of microaggressions, where you're constantly placed in situations where nobody's unaccepting of you, but it's the constant questioning of your personal identity that just is psychologically taxing over time. And so about a year ago, I was participating in an event. I was helping organize an event at the California Academy of Sciences that was being done in partnership with 500 Women Scientists, which was an organization that started, I guess, about 3 years ago now. And the goal of it was to support women in science and support helping them find their voice, I think, and find better equality in the workplace. And I've been so impressed by that organization because it really created this sense of community for women in science that I had never seen before. But for me, I've always felt a little bit on the outside of that, because although I identify as a woman, certainly that's not at the forefront of my personal identity, because like Giles mentioned, I don't have the standard heteronormative home life. And so whereas most of my female colleagues that are at my stage in my career might be discussing getting married or having children and what they need to do in order to accommodate that with their professional lives. That's simply not my situation. And instead, my situation is that I don't have a standard home life. I have adopted children, and every time I have to discuss with my colleagues on the weekend what we did, it inevitably turns into an entire life history because nobody can quite wrap their head around what my personal life is. And I hate that. I really hate that constant exposure of my personal life in ways that I don't feel like my other colleagues have to do. And I think that what it really led to for me was a feeling of isolation. And I got to thinking that if I, a queer woman working in San Francisco, one of the most gay-friendly places on earth, is feeling isolated in my professional career, there must be people in less gay-friendly places around the world feeling the same way. And I thought, the 500 Women Scientists model has been so great because it's been community-driven and it's created this feeling of community. Why there should be something like that for LGBTQ people. And so I came up with this idea that maybe I could do something about it. And of course, as a scientist, before I started doing something about it, I decided to see if it was really true, to see what other people had researched and published about the experiences of LGBTQ people in the workplace and in STEM generally. And what I found, first of all, was that there's actually not very much. It's been largely ignored in the scientific literature, unlike the experiences of other minorities in science. And that it's starting to gain some traction. So just in the last 2 years, there's been a smattering of publications of studies. And these studies are largely based on surveys, so they're people reporting their own personal experiences. But what really hit home for me was when I came across this publication by the American Physical Society, which is not my field at all. It's actually like the furthest possible thing from my field of life sciences. And so when I read this statement in their report on LGBT climate and physics, it really rang home for me. And I'm just gonna tell you a quick excerpt from that. And what it says is that the major issues faced by sexual minority STEM professionals, including a heterosexist climate that reinforces gender role stereotypes in STEM work environments, and a culture that requires or at least strongly encourages LGBTQ people to remain closeted at work, and a general lack of awareness about LGBTQ issues among STEM professionals are the primary things that are affecting or impacting queer scientists, at least in the field of physics. And so in reading that and realizing that that was exactly all the things that I had experienced in life sciences, I think really propelled me forward in creating a visibility campaign to allow us to share our stories. And most of the information that I have about the current state of LGBT sciences stems from studies done in the US. So they're certainly not global studies. But of the few things that have been done, they've found that about 40% of LGBT workers working in STEM fields professionally are not out to their colleagues. And that's actually a higher percentage than nationwide here in the US. So it indicates that conversely, while I think many people think of academic institutions as these liberal houses that are safe havens for people to come and study and do pure research, it's actually not true at all. In fact, that they're quite hostile. And that's echoed by another study that was done again in the US that found that out faculty members, 70% of them have experienced exclusionary behavior from their colleagues at work. So that means that if you decide to come out, if you take that leap, you're more likely to have experienced exclusionary behavior than those colleagues that aren't out yet. And that's quite appalling, in my opinion. In fact, they're 7 times more likely to have experienced this exclusionary behavior than their closeted counterparts. So I think what that really says is that there's a problem, and that's a great opportunity to do something about it, to create a community as a first step, but then to start to create resources for universities, in particular training for universities, to take the step of integrating LGBTQ people. And I think, in many places are quite fortunate where it's something that can be openly discussed at work because people don't have to be afraid of their job security by outing themselves. But here in the US, for example, in 28 states, you can actually be fired just for being gay. It's grounds for termination of your employment. They don't have to evaluate the successes that you've made or the papers that you've written or how good you are at your job. You can just be terminated because you're gay. And so in many places, it's actually not even something that you can really openly discuss at work without fear of retribution. So that's terrifying. And so the thing that I decided to do was just create this visibility campaign. And the visibility campaign is an online campaign. It's called 500 Queer Scientists, modeled after the inspiration that I had from 500 Women Scientists. And the goal of it is simply to provide a platform for scientists to come together, actually not just scientists, all people working in STEM and STEM supporting careers, to come together and share their stories about their personal lives, about their careers, about the successes that they've made in science. And when I started this, I started it in some ways from kind of a selfish place because I felt this isolation and I wanted to meet other queer scientists out there and interact with them. And I didn't really know how the community at large would respond to this campaign. I thought, perhaps people will come together online on Twitter, as many people do, to complain. I think that Twitter is a pretty common platform for complaining, which is great. It gives us a place to air our grievances. But in fact, it's been quite the contrary. We now have over 850 people who have contributed their stories on our website, and these people are from all over the world. They're from all different stages of their careers, from undergraduate students all the way to deans at universities. They're from all different fields. And by and large, what people want to do is sing their successes, right? Like just have a place where they can explain to the world the scientific contributions that they've made and have the feeling that they're being recognized with both parts of their identity, that of their professional career and that of their LGBTQ identity. And I think that as Alexis touched on, when you separate those two parts of your identity, it's damaging. I think it's damaging for science, not just damaging for us personally, as Giles mentioned, which it absolutely is. It's psychologically damaging for the individual scientists, but more importantly, it's damaging for science, because when the total diversity of scientists isn't fully represented in the field, it leads us in some really wrong directions. It leads us in directions that historically, as scientists, we don't really want to think about, because they're directions that have been used to deny certain populations from equality. They've been it's scientific ideas that have been weaponized to keep other people down. And it's also ways that we haven't fully had a complete worldview of the things that we're studying. Like, for example, inferring that all of animal life is gendered as male and female, unlike the reality, which is that it's actually often not gendered in the way that we interpret gender as a predominantly, well, at least historically, predominantly white male society in science. Straight white male society. So I think that it's not only is it important to have this sort of visibility to encourage us to be our true selves, to be our whole selves at work, and to find community, but it's also important because it progresses science forward. And at the end of the day, as scientists and people working in technology and engineering and mathematics, what we want is to propel our fields forward and to see the leaps and discoveries that we all hope we're going to make in our own careers happen. So with that, thank you for hearing me. And we're also 500 Queer Scientists is not a 500 really. It's an infinite number of people who want to contribute their stories. So if you're out there and you have a story that you'd like to contribute, visit our website at 500queerscientists.com, or you can follow us on social media at on Twitter at 500queersci and on Instagram at 500queerscientists to just read stories of scientists in the community and connect with others.
Thank you, Lauren, for bringing the point that how our personal identities shape new discoveries, and how individuals are affected, as well as science in general is affected. With this, I'd like to thank all the speakers of this webinar for sharing their experiences and their ideas. We are having actually a lot of questions coming in, but before that, I would mention again that if you want to have a question asked, please go to the GoToWebinar question box, or tweet us at Elife community using ECI Wednesday hashtag. We'll move on to the first question, which is, how can we help our allies understand the importance of sharing diversity and inclusion work so minorities or minority groups do not have to do it all?
I think that's a really great question, because oftentimes as a minority group, the pressure is on you to communicate the importance of being accepting to your colleagues who don't belong to that minority group. And it's really a burden that shouldn't be shouldered by minority groups who already have an abundance of pressures placed on them. And you know, I meant to, when I was just talking, meant to touch on how to be, I think, how to be a good ally, or at least how to be more aware. And certainly, I think that the most important thing is to not make assumptions. That's something that I think probably all of us here in this panel have experienced, where people have made assumptions about our identity, and then left us to be the one to explain and correct that assumption. So in not making assumptions, you're already making a great first step in removing the burden from LGBTQ people to engage socially in professional settings, which at the end of the day, we all do all the time. We can say that we don't, but things come up. We all engage socially at meetings, at conferences, interacting with students or mentors. And so not making assumptions, I think, is a huge first step. But secondarily, I think that this is something that has been shared quite a bit in the women in science community. It's just helping LGBTQ people or other minority groups have a voice. And that means echoing what they're saying, so that they don't have to be the ones echoing themselves. So it's creating this amplification system wherein if somebody says something, you can continue that message forward if they're not being heard. And so if you're sitting in a meeting or you're sitting in a conference and a colleague of yours has said something to you privately, you can be the one speaking up on their behalf. And I think that those are two really, really great ways to be an ally. I think also it's important to note that for most LGBT people, their mentors, their most important mentors, weren't necessarily queer. And so it's really key to recognize that you might be an important mentor and that you need to be fully aware of people's identities in order to mentor them fully, and ensure that they succeed. So you have to have their own personal attributes in mind during that mentorship process.
If I can add to that, so I think one of the hardest things for me has been almost a silence around LGBT within the scientific workplace. It's, it's just not discussed at all. And until I felt comfortable enough to really start putting it out there and say, no, we really need to be discussing this, it's just silent. And I think if we, as the LGBT members of this community, and particularly, as a faculty member, I feel it is upon myself to sort of maybe start this process, but, within our own organization, starting groups that are actually giving a forum for the LGBT community and their allies to come together and just talk about it. Because if it's not talked about, if it's not mentioned, I mean, most scientific organizations are just not discussing LGBT, and it's not on the agenda. So it feels like you're just the silent minority that's never discussed. And so I think for me, what would have been incredibly powerful just 15 years ago when I first started as a faculty member was that actually my organization started a discussion on LGBT, and it would have made me feel much more comfortable about being within that organization. Just that alone, just somebody saying LGBT on, or even though it took 15 years at my previous organization before we actually had somebody from Stonewall and actually talked in front of the organization in an official manner and say lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. It was the first time I ever heard in 15 years at that organization those words mentioned in an official context. And if you don't hear it, if you can just end up being the sort of silent minority that's hiding your identity, trying to get on with your jobs. But I think it would be very, very helpful to have more groups, more open discussion of the subject. For me, I know that would have been very helpful.
Thank you, Jalas. Alexis, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I would like to. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Lauren, for your intervention. You mentioned the word microaggressions and the hostility that you, as a researcher, also experience in the academia. So I want to address how we also systematically get displaced from that place, because there is a whole infrastructure that doesn't work, or there is also a lack of infrastructure that supports you. So in the case of trans people, because when we're talking, for example, about gender equality office or diversity office, for them it's only being man or being a woman. That's it. And for them, it's like LGBT is just like the same bag. So for them, they don't still even understand why sexuality and gender is different. Basically, that is this heteronormative mindset that is so deeply ingrained culturally. So what I want to say is that in the case of trans people, it was just recent till summer last year that the World Health Organization declared that it's not a mental illness. For many years, trans people has always existed and has always contributed to research and development and many other careers, but they had to invisibilize themselves. So the institutions who are actually doing these homeopathic microaggressions every day, it's like a drop, like homeopathic drops. They should provide support and protection, but actually those schools, other institutions like hospitals and healthcare, and have been the one actually oppressing us. That's why I start actually talking about how we can transform this culture in this construction. How can we transform it? And it's so beautiful when you talk about allies, because if someone has privilege, it should share it with other people of privilege, so that weight is not in our shoulders. That is not only in the case, like the trans community actually, historically, in LGBT history, were the ones who throw the first stone in Stonewall. Because they were the most oppressed, and they were actually the ones who, that's why in many parts of the world, actually gay and lesbian people can marry, because trans people were the most oppressed and silenced. So they actually had no other choice to dedicate their energy for their rights, because there was no one else to support them. So we are actually, as professionals, in certain infrastructures where there is a very poor understanding, and not even our gay and lesbian colleagues has been able to support the transgender community. I think I want to address this as a separate topic, because there is this still very huge gap of knowledge.
Yes.
And this
Yes.
asymmetric difference is not only one side doing the effort, because there is an asymmetric difference. So there must be also a certain level of acceptance from the people of privilege to find
Well said.
a place where they can meet. So when it comes to making allies, is that if there is someone cisgender that has privilege and is white and etc., they should also give a hand to other people, not only to vocalize, but it also means resources, access to resources. I want to say that I am a very I like science is a beautiful thing, and I'm very grateful to the experience I had in the academic institutions where I received education. I had beautiful moments of growth and development and intellectual nurture. And there have been also some other moments that were actually very lonely and in pain. So I accept both, but I want to send to this situation in my past, you know, where I actually had experienced a lot of suffering. I want to also send forgiveness for the carelessness, because for diversity people, it can become a very easily bitter overpoint when we are trying to vocalize ourselves. And I forgive myself for having expectations from institutions who were actually not prepared, who were actually lacking of information, who were still ignorant. So I want to talk about, to be a good ally, you need humility, to be humble. And that's why I started speaking about the human ego, because plants and the animal kingdom and the mineral kingdom, they cannot talk, or at least we haven't figured out that way. But that separation towards who is the other and this outcasting and this displacement we experience, we humans. So to be humble is very important, to be a very good ally in order to listen with an open heart and not only with the mind. Because for many years, there has been a lot of research about what are the reasons why people are sexuality or gender identity is different. And there has been many years of social movements in order to bring more consciousness and change into it. When you are into STEM, engineering and science, people tend to forget, okay, science and technology, I forget everything that's related with humanities and with arts. So we also, in this community, when you talk about the microaggressions where it's more hostile, those spaces are lacking of social and human awareness, because knowledge has been reduced to measure and quantifying and making technological progress in an ecosystem that can no longer support that. And a way how to make this sustainable in a way that we can all being balanced requires to be open and to love. Because I have received in my biography microaggressions from men and women. We tend to say only the white man, but no, it's not only that. Because violence is not masculine or feminine. Both men and women can be violent. But the expressions of violence is different. It's different. I had female colleagues who say to me, you should not walk this way. You should save that walk for the gay pride. So basically she's telling me you don't belong to this space because the way you walk does not belong to this space. So violence is not male or female. It has different ways, but people have different ways to express violence. And this lack of violence is because people are not in touch to their caring nature. And,
thank you, Alex.
And like the directors and the people who are PIs, if they are examples that people you should look at, they should be also an example of that, of caring, and be an example of being humble. So I send love to everyone, and
thank you, Alexis, for that. Yeah, thanks a lot for that, bringing that very important point. So I'd like to have your closing comments on one other question, which is when applying for fellowships or grants, usually the minorities such as racial minorities and other such are usually given affirmative actions. Do you think LGBTQ should be a minority? They should give a minority status that's recognized in these fellowships, provided we have such unique challenges. I take closing comments from each of you in the next 60 seconds each, so we could close the webinar in time.
So I can start. Yes, I definitely think so. You know, I think the LGBTQ community has a lot of challenges that we have to deal with in our everyday lives, and particularly in our work life. We deal with a lot of prejudices, as we've heard. I don't think anybody said some particularly happy stories here. So, you know, I think we've all experienced prejudices and challenges within the workplace. And so almost certainly, I think if other minorities are being given preferential treatment, then the LGBT community should be included in that.
Any other thoughts on this? Yeah,
I think it's certainly something that I agree with. I think that we should be able to self-identify if and when it's safe. I mean, I think in many places it's simply not safe to identify that. There's been some movement from the National Science Foundation to include that question in this post-grad survey that they do every year. And I think that in that survey that's sort of the first step to including minority status such as LGBTQ in applications to the National Science Foundation. And so I think that here in the US there's a little bit of early movement towards including that as a minority identity.
Yeah, Alexis, closing comments on that. If you require affirmative action for LGBTQ scientists in fellowships and grants and such kinds.
Yeah, well, maybe I just want to talk about how open science is actually an opportunity that is positive, where there is room for a new way how to change certain paradigms. I just want to leave that as a possibility.
Okay, thank you for that nice comments. With this, I'd like to thank all the panelists again for sharing their views and answering the questions, which was keeping this panel very interesting. And so we'll also have the webinar for next month, which is on establishing equitable collaborative partnerships. And please do join this webinar. You'd find the links in the chat box to join. And I can thank all the audience who had joined us today. This is the official end of this particular webinar where we see face-to-face all the panelists, but we will continue the discussions in Twitter using ECI Wednesday hashtag. You can, there are still more unanswered questions which we'll try and answer in the next 1 hour, and keep getting all your discussions and questions using ECI Wednesday hashtag. Thank you everyone again for joining us, and have a nice evening / morning, afternoon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.